Hey, what's up, everyone? Oohaleyeah here. It's TJ. Thanks for joining me. Apologies, I don't have an interview scheduled today. I usually do them on Tuesday mornings each week, but I was a little iffy about doing it because my wife is scheduled to have a baby any minute now, and I was worried I'd have to cancel on someone. So we're looking at potentially doing Heather McDonald or Eric Metaxas. I think we'll push one to next week. But I appreciate those of you who are new subs who are joining me. And since I'm not doing that, I'll do a little stream of consciousness, which I hope to do a lot more often now that I've got my streaming software up. And I just haven't been doing. Oh, let me hit record on the MP3. The podcast recorder. If you want to check out either Google, I think iTunes is up, but Google Play Podcasts, Oohaleyeah. The podcasts are also up through Spreaker. So if you're into the audio only, you can definitely go ahead and subscribe there. So clickbait title, Roaming Millennial heats up Arizona. It was either that or Roaming Millennial violates the conditions of her restraining order, which my wife had to place against her since she's constantly been stalking me. I joke. Everyone on YouTube thinks it's funny. I don't remember who I've met that I actually have seen on YouTube before now. I met some at Politicon last year, which I didn't attend this year. But I can't really think of who else other than Roaming that's come to town. Maybe there have been some. So I want to check it out. I want to see if her persona is the same in person as it is online. Very lovely, very polite, very beautiful, easy on the eyes, and seems like a really nice person. So that was pretty cool. And I hope the college Republicans at ASU do more events like that. Let's see what's in the news. If you don't use the Liberty Daily, you should. And hopefully you will, because they can quit putting all these ridiculous ads right in the mid part of their page. I also have a recommendation. If you're on Instagram or social media and you're not following Made by Jim Bob, his art is hilarious. He makes these hilarious memes, and they make me laugh every time he puts one up. I support free speech, just not hate speech. I support physics, just not gravity. This is Mr. Smug. So there's a recommendation for you. So what I'd like to do today is, after listening to the speech Roaming Millennial gave, it makes me wonder what I would talk about if I were going to go see a group of college students and talk about current events or something that would make an impact on them, especially if I knew I was going to get people from opposing viewpoints to come and see me. Her talk was on feelings don't care about your facts, and that we don't communicate with people in a way that they'll actually respond, which I think is a really important topic and something that I tell people when they ask about the podcast. Well, why do you do it? Well, when do you do it? You have all these kids and you have a job, and it's not easy. I wish I'd started when I was 20 and wasting most of my time. But one of the things that I have set out to do is ask a question that makes someone sincerely say, that's a really good question. I hadn't thought about that. And not just the way they do it to be nice. Oh, good question. I'm glad you asked that, like James Carville does in Old School in the debate. Really glad you asked that question. I was hoping you would. Let me tell you what my answer is to that. No, when they really stop and go, you know what? That's a really good question, because those pause you and make you consider things that you hadn't. They make you question your own beliefs or thought process and say, where does this piece fit into the grand puzzle? And so during the Q&A, it was actually hard for me to just sit there and listen to everyone else ask each other questions because I wanted to jump in so bad. So come back to that. Roaming Millennial gave a great talk. Feelings don't care about your facts. Mentioned 4 of the 5 love languages, and I shamed her later for not remembering the most important love language of all, which is physical touch, since the majority of men have it. If you're a man and physical touch is not your love language, I'm not going to say what I'm thinking next. I'm funnier in person than I am online. I want to get in trouble. Anyway, so there were a couple questions that came out afterwards, and I started writing them down because they were good questions, and I found myself going, man, if Roaming and I were just sitting on the couch up in Canada or wherever, this would be an interesting discussion, because she feels totally different about some of these things than I do in terms of giving advice and what the right response is. So first question. Guy behind me says, and I might find this video at some point and post it, or maybe I should do commentary on that, but whatever. It was about Donald Trump's style, right? He said, you know, the thing that Republicans were reluctant to do for so long was to hit back, was to be incivil, was to throw it back in their face as hard as it came in. You know, Gavin McInnes has been in the news lately for his thoughts on the Proud Boys and inciting fights and punching back, and I'm ambivalent about that, because I'm a fan of him because he's funny and he's witty, he's razor sharp. But I don't think that violence is the answer. I think the answer is reconciliation. I've given up the punchline already, because if you listen to my interview I did with James Robbins, he talked about how after the Civil War happened, these guys who were sworn enemies and were killing each other and the family members of each other, we talked about how after the war, General Lee didn't want to participate in any of the Civil War you know, celebrations or any of the, what do they call it? When they basically act out the fights and the battles afterwards. He said, I want no part of that. I don't want to open up old wounds and scars. It's done. And they're our brothers. And so anyway, this guy said, I feel like we have to really take a lesson from Donald Trump and realize if we don't hit these people back, you know, it's not going to make the impact. Look what he's doing. And I thought, you know, on the macro scale, that's probably true. You have the political spectrum. You have the small fringe of people on the left who are basically unreachable. You have the small fringe of people on the right that kind of make you cringe a little bit, that they have a lot of the same beliefs that you do. You have all these people in the middle. And the very first podcast I ever did was Andy Andrews' How to Kill 11 Million People, where he said the big problem with trolling and doing the Milo Yiannopoulos thing is if they don't like you, they will never listen to you. So all you get is the satisfaction of knowing that you trolled someone. And that's it. It stops there. And if you can make a career out of that and become famous, that's great. But for these people who are your friends and your family and your coworkers and your neighbors, that's not going to work. So I don't remember what Roaming said to this answer, but I wrote missed opportunity afterwards. I would have responded with talk about reconciliation and how it takes a person of character and virtue and integrity to be able to go to someone who doesn't agree with them and care enough about them to teach them about freedom, to ask them questions that make them question themselves. I don't think Trump's style in politics is implemented on an individual level. You talk to people who know him, who work with him, and they talk about what a great, caring, compassionate, loving person that he is. You don't get the firebrand that you see on the campaign trail. You know, and a good example of this is I couldn't be a politician who gave Ted Cruz the moniker Lying Ted. As much as I don't love Jeb Bush, you know, to call him low energy Jeb or sleepy Jeb or whatever, I know that someday I'll turn around and say, this guy's actually a compatriot. He's a brother. He's someone that I have to work with. I'm not going to disparage him one day and then the next say, hey, he's truthful Ted. He's Ted, the guy who's done more for me than anyone else. I just wouldn't be able to go to sleep at night knowing that my memory was that short. It works for Trump and it works on the macro stage. It does not work at the person-to-person level. So I think the answer is we have to be able to reconcile. If we are the people with the moral code, if we are the ones with a better way, then we cannot slap everyone back if we feel that we've been slighted. So what do? I think one of the big things is ask, don't tell. There was a video today on PragerU where Will Wheat, I forget his name, was interviewing a progressive Muslim Middle Eastern girl, I don't know, and was laying out his beliefs for her and really just slayed her. She kind of slayed herself because she's kept asking about all these horrible things in Western culture that we've had to put up with. And he says, yeah, but, you know, we don't do that anymore. We ended slavery. We don't have a civil war. They have it all over the planet. There's 30 million slaves. Didn't make her defend her belief system. Didn't ask her where in Eastern culture these things are prominent or they fought civil wars. And I think for me, it's asking a question that forces someone to admit something they don't believe in might be true. That's the first step. I had an example of this years ago. I have a uncle-in-law, I guess he would be, who is a big MSNBC guy, loves Rachel Maddow, Sky Screamer when Trump won. And he would get into it. He's the guy at Thanksgiving, right? And we had this chat where he just said, these CEOs, these Walmart, and they pay their people and they minimum wage and they screw the little guy and they get $30 million jumps. I go, hey, look, I get it. What about Harold Raines? What about the guy at Fannie Mae who made $90 million in 6 years in the late 90s for basically overseeing a $6 billion accounting scandal at the largest federal housing subsidy unit in the world? What about that guy? Is that any different than what happens in the private sector? Tell me. Well, I don't really know much about it. Okay, well, if you don't, is it okay if it happens in the private sector where there's nothing we can do about it? This guy was appointed. He was Clinton's budget director. $60 million, gave $30 million, $90 million, gave $30 million back in a settlement and basically robbed the place blind. At Walmart, they can get rid of the board of directors and their consumers can shop somewhere else. And the government, where do they go? What do we do? Yeah, I guess you got a point. Then later admitted that teachers unions are giving unions a bad name. Then you asked enough questions and they go, okay, well, I guess there are some things here that are valid based on the arguments you're giving to me. Create cognitive dissonance by asking good questions. The reason I love to do interviews, you get the opportunity to ask good questions that make both people think and hopefully those listening appreciate it. So I don't even claim to be that good at it, but I'm trying to get better because when you go one-on-one and someone's willing to engage you, asking good questions forces them to listen to what you're saying and to think about what comes out of their mouth, at which point you can let them know how little sense that it makes because they haven't thought about it enough. So if you aren't willing to ask questions, if they're not willing to ask you questions and consider what you ask, you're never going to make a dent. So slapping them is just going to give you satisfaction and not change anything. Next question. What is contributing? Guy on my left said, what is contributing to the levels of uncivility? Hold on, let me make sure the volume is working okay. Hang on. What is contributing? Yep, it is. Cool. My streaming is still not 100%. What is contributing to the levels of incivility we're seeing over the last 15 to 20 years? And Roman did a pretty good job with this one, talking about the Democratic Party moving further to the left and how people are increasingly being, their anger is being flamed like fire. And I think the answer is there is no sense of historical context. I mean, people only really know what's happened since they started paying attention. So when he said over the last 15 or 20 years, I'm whispering, you mean the last 200 years? Go back and listen to the podcast I just did with Dr. Berzer talking about Andrew Jackson. One thing we didn't cover was, I think it was in 1856, there was a guy named Charles Sumner who got beat nearly to death in the halls of Congress with a cane by a guy named Brooks. And I pulled some notes from what happened before that. Now, keep in mind, this is back when they were fighting about slavery, back when they settled personal disputes with a duel, where you had to, what did Charlie Murphy say? When someone was habitually line stepping, like there was a gunfight, someone went out, you went outside, and someone had to go. And so you really had to believe in the things you were saying. You couldn't just do what we do now as internet warriors and hide behind the safety of an internet connection and a thin layer of anonymity. You had to put some you-know-what behind it. So check this out. I pulled this off the net because we didn't have a chance to talk about it in the last podcast. And May 22nd, 1856, the world's greatest deliberative body became a combat zone. In one of the most dramatic and deeply ominous moments in the Senate's entire history, a member of the House of Reps entered the Senate chamber and savagely beat a senator into unconsciousness. All right, here we go. The inspiration for the clash came days earlier when Senator Charles Sumner, a Massachusetts anti-slavery Republican, he's the guy that got beat down because he's anti-slavery. Let's let that sink in a little bit. Addressed the Senate on the explosive issue of whether Kansas should be admitted to the Union as a slave state or a free state. In his, quote, crime against Kansas speech, Sumner identified two Democratic senators as the principal culprits in this crime: Stephen Douglas of Illinois and Andrew Butler of South Carolina. He characterized Douglas to his face as a, quote, noisome, squat, and nameless animal, not a proper model for an American senator. Hate speech. Andrew Butler, who was not present, received more elaborate treatment, mocking the South Carolina's stance as a man of chivalry. The Massachusetts senator charged him with, quote, taking a mistress who, though ugly to others, is always lovely to him, unquote. That's awesome. Though polluted in the sight of the world, is chaste in his sight. Added Sumner, the harlot, slavery. Preston Brooks was Butler's South Carolina kinsman. If he believed Sumner to be a gentleman, he might have challenged him to a duel, but instead, he took the Antifa route. He chose the light of his cane to, he chose a light cane of the type used to discipline unruly dogs. And shortly after the Senate adjourned for the day, he came back to the halls while Sumner was attaching his postal frank to copies of his crime against Kansas speech because they had to mail them out. Awesome. Moving quickly, Brooks slammed his metal top cane into the unsuspecting Sumner's head. As Brooks struck again and again, Sumner arose and lurched blindly across the chamber, futilely attempting to protect himself. After a very long minute, it ended. Sumner had to be carried out of the chamber, whereas Brooks walked out without any immediate consequence, although he was later censured and there were some consequences. So when you're talking about incivility and you look at what Nancy Pelosi's doing and what Maxine Waters is doing, what happened in Minnesota with the people being assaulted, what happened to the Republican office in New York, some of the awesome memes that are out there, just remember, Republicans were supposed to die as a party around the time of the last election. They're enjoying a surge that's totally unpredicted and unprecedented. This after being told that they were basically on life support and would never win another election. If you're on the other side, if you're predicting this blue wave and you're trying to make it happen and you're realizing now it's non-existent, you're hearing in the news that it's been pumped up this whole time and it's basically fake, the Democrats have been so desperate to paint themselves as the compassionate and the virtuous among us that they basically created standards that their moral code will never allow them to justify. It's going to get worse. Nazi, rapist, racist. These are not valid arguments. These are signs of pure desperation. Have the popcorn ready. All right, so question. Nice long, young black girl in the front. She looked a little older than she said she was. She's like, hey, I'm not your typical conservative. I'm a black woman in high school. She's a young girl. And she says, I was threatened to be lynched by a black family friend for wearing a MAGA hat. What should I do about this? Now think about that. 17-year-old high school black conservative who said a friend of hers threatened to lynch her for wearing her hat. She had to take it off. Not unlike what happened to Kanye on Saturday Night Live, except I don't think they threatened to lynch him. So, roaming, oh, it's so horrible. I mean, that should never happen. We shouldn't tolerate it. I don't recall what she said here afterwards. But for me, the takeaway is this is not new. Like, again, historical context. There have been people that have wanted to lynch blacks for a long, long time. Fortunately, because of the civility in our country, we stopped doing it 100, 150 years ago, and it's not a thing anymore. But when it was, there were upwards of 4,000 people that were lynched. All right? What often isn't talked about, and I talked to Dinesh D'Souza in another interview I did, is you should check it out. I'll link to my list of all interviews that I've done. But anyway, is that about 3,000 or so of these people were blacks. What people don't talk about is the remaining number of them were whites or other non-blacks, people who were anti-slavery, people who wanted to give liberty and equality to these black former slaves and current slaves, and they were punished for it brutally. So take the mindset of those people and what they fought for and what they believed in, and think about who was attacking them for those beliefs. And you see a lot of similarities to today. This is not new. When you point out that the Democratic Party has had a history of this behavior, the typical answer is, well, of course, but the parties switched. They played Red Rover, and everyone from one side went to the other and vice versa, which is impossible. On a principle and virtue or character side of these arguments, it would never happen. If someone tells you the parties switch, go, all right, when are they going to switch again? Like, you can't pinpoint when it happened or why it happened. You can just talk about who potentially switched. So rather than do that, let's talk about when we're going to see this thing happen again. Because if it's happened in the past, it'll happen again. When are all the Trump voters going to flip magically and say, I support Bernie Sanders? And one of the Bernie voters, hopefully at the exact same time, going to go, you know what? Good point. Trump supporters, former Trump supporters, I'm going to support Trump. And then 100 years from now, we can talk about how the parties switched again. And everyone who wasn't here might not automatically go, yeah, no, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. So, talking about party switching, you can't believe in individual freedom and compulsion at the same time. Henry Hazlitt had a great quote that if you love liberty, you love others. If you love power, you love yourself. You can't want to compel people to behave in a certain way and believe in freedom. They're not congruent. One party believes in one thing, the other one does another, and they politically accomplish these means through different ends, or ends through different means. You can't believe people should think and act in a way that suits them best, that they can decide, and that they shouldn't be able to exercise free speech and freedom of expression without being threatened by violence, bodily harm, or death. Jordan Peterson had a clip that I posted a long time ago, said, in all probability, if you lived in Germany during the war, you would have been a Nazi. Because you would have gone with the popular narrative, you would have chosen a path of least resistance, you would have liked to think you would buck a popular trend, but the data shows that's not the case. Most people just go with the flow. If there was a social or financial downside to not doing so, you would have been a Nazi. So to this young lady, I said, your friend is evidence that of this principle, that it's a lasting nature. It's something that never goes away, a part of human nature, that people have to consciously grow out of or evolve away from or think or act their way. Just they have to separate themselves from it. She, this friend who wants to lynch her, has been taught or at least primed to believe that threatening to do violence to someone for superficial differences is justified. Just like people who used to lynch blacks 100 years ago felt the same way. People that sick the dogs on them 50 years ago felt the same way. And people that keep them on the voting plantation now in exchange for welfare and promises and dependency, well, you could say 2 years ago, we're seeing some of that change. It's no different. What she did to this young lady was a horrible thing, but it's not different than what's been happening to blacks for 150 years since the Civil Rights Movement. And it's what's interesting is the Civil War was fought. It took 100 years to basically have the Democrats realize there was a better way, a better strategy by which they could keep the black vote. Not Jim Crow, not segregation, not separate but equal, not sticking dogs after them, not Selma. Like, they could do it differently and easier and actually increase their political clout instead of looking like horrible people who are willing to do horrible things to other humans who don't deserve it. So my final answer to that would have been Frederick Douglass, or who's the other guy I've been reading lately? Franklin Frazier, who wrote about the black family over 100 years ago, and the sociological issues that come with differences in race. Frederick Douglass is the one who said that blacks should be cultivating their minds more and their lungs less. good example here for that young lady. Kanye said something similar. He said brands, not lands. Blacks need land, not brands. Something like that. I thought it was actually pretty profound. It's a good thing. They want to identify with something. Identify with being smart, making good decisions, having good judgment, being successful in life, not with threatening people for wearing something you don't like. Question. What do we do? Where am I on time here? 20 minutes. Okay, cool. A couple more. What do we do about college campuses and social media platforms? And I don't remember what she said here. Again, I liked all of her answers. It would have been fun to chat with her specifically. But again, look at the history and the present. We take for granted that Google, since they're one of the largest companies on the planet, is going to exist forever. They said the same thing about Montgomery Ward, same thing about Sears, same thing about these other monoliths of business and industry that have vanished. You look at the Soviet Union, look at the principles and characteristics that cause these things to fail over time, and you'll see a lot of similarities. They will collapse under the weight of their own ineptness, their shifty moral positions, and their forsaken mission statements. The fact that they no longer do what they set out to do. Google's mission statement was, don't be evil. And now it's, call us when you need evil. We're willing to do anything to achieve our means. I'm referring mostly to the deal they worked out with China to censor and bug people over there. Who knows what else they're doing? We know what their ideology is. We know how freaked out they were when Trump won. We know what happened to James Damore. Who knows what's really going on in there? But the people that run it, the people that are hired, the ideology of the people that are there gives you some insight into what's going to happen, which is why you can predict where they'll end up if they don't make a change. So look at Facebook. Facebook's going the way of MySpace. I read a comment today online where a guy was like, yeah, no, I'm not on Facebook. Why? Because I'm a grown man. And I kind of had to laugh. It's not working. They just had the former CEO, founder of Oculus leave. The guys from WhatsApp are gone. The guys from Instagram are gone. It's a sinking ship. They're on their way out. And one of the comments was, Facebook of 2012 is not Facebook of 2018. And to me, that says it all. What happened in 6 years that caused one of the biggest companies in the world to be an undesirable place to be, where people want to leave more than they want to stay? We can talk about that another time. Look at Twitter. Did you see the rant that Jack Dorsey went on about his algorithm and I don't even know how to put it into a slogan of the stream of nonsense that came out of his mouth. But the bottom line is he's lost his way and it's haplessly destroying his creation. The best comments were, Jack, just give me a timeline of the people I follow in the order that they tweet. That's all I want. Which were to infer you don't need to save the world. You don't need to make us all like each other. You don't need to cure racism, sexism, and homophobia. You just need to give us a Twitter that does what it did when it came out, when we liked it. You forget your mission statement. You forget that your job as a company is to serve your customer the best way that you can for as long as you can. And they get away from it. And eventually, if you get away from your core mission long enough, the mission of the company changes and it shifts. And if that doesn't work, the company starts to crumble. It happens with people. It happens with companies. It happens with nations. Count on it. It's going to happen. There will be new platforms. There will be new opportunities. The key for you, and this is something else said about having a big channel versus a small channel, is, are you ready? Are you engaged? Are you training and sharpening your sword so that you're ready when the battle starts, or whatever analogy you want to use? Are you doing something to take advantage of that opportunity when it comes along? One of my guys who makes up really awkward puns and sayings says, some guys get ready, some guys stay ready. Says it all the time. I don't even know what it means, but I thought of it when I was putting this together. Do something. Roaming did tell people, look, when you have 300,000 followers, some things are easier, but also the audience gets bored. They've heard all your stories. They know everything about you. They move on to the next thing. We like shiny objects. Like, they need smaller, new up-and-coming channels to keep it fresh. They're going to seek you out. Nothing's going to last forever. And that includes these ginormous companies that are making horrible mistakes about how to run their business. Then there was my question. I first shamed her for forgetting the fifth love language. But also, the main thing I asked was, if you've been a sub to the channel, I've got some really great interviews with guys like Ramon Ibrahim for Sword and Scimitar, Robert Spencer, Raheem Kassam. If you mention Islam, if you mention certain topics, automatic demonetization. Automatic, you're gone. Fortunately for me, I've got a job. I enjoy doing this. That's why I do it. I'm not seeking for fame or for a giant. I would like to reach more people, but really it's not that difficult for me. I do it when I have extra time. Everyone has about 8 spare hours if they work and sleep in their day to do what they think is most important. And so this for me represents something I do after having moved a lot of the lower priorities out of my life and after the kids go to bed. Period. That's it. That's all I can get away with. So if you're going to do that, you want it to be as impactful as possible. YouTube restricts our ability to do it. So I asked Roaming, at your level, what's the conversation like about where this goes going forward? YouTube hates us. They don't like what we do. They don't like what we say. They permit us at their pleasure to be on their platform. But other social media platforms aren't playing along. What do we do? Where do we go? What do you guys who live and breathe off this, who actually feed yourselves, Roman Millennial, Steven Crowder, Stefan Molyneux, what are you talking about in your circle? And unfortunately, she didn't have a good answer for me. I wanted to also ask a follow-up about CRTV and how things are going. I actually think that Daily Wire is better run because they're not fully behind a paywall. I'm not a subscriber to CRTV because they gave Mark Stein the boot, and I read the court paperwork, the things they said about him, the way they referred to him. Like, sounds like something you would hear in Hillary Clinton's campaign after James O'Keefe comes out with a hidden camera. Like, it's a little sketchy. Could be wrong about that. Don't know for sure, like a lot of their hosts. But I just wonder how long you can preach to the choir behind a paywall, like Mark Stein said, and still influence anyone outside of your inner circle. For that reason, I think Daily Wire is doing a better job. But Roaming couldn't take a question that long, so she just said, there's no real good answer. It's to diversify. Or as what's his name would say, to Kiyosaki would say, diversify, to give yourself better odds of not being totally crushed when YouTube says, no más. No queremos que hables más de esa cosa. Así que, anyway, I hope the college Republicans do more events like that going forward. I hope that if anything in this rant interested you, you'll check out some of the links I posted. I've got a spreadsheet I made with every single interview I've done, political-wise. It doesn't have the old Shark Tank podcast and Mark Cuban, Marcus Lemonis interviews, stuff like that. But check it out. Check it out. If you like the content, please share it. I hate social media. I try not to go on it. But if you're on there and you have friends and family that would enjoy the message, do me a favor, share it. The podcast is available, and I will kick things back off next Tuesday. I think I have interviews scheduled for the next 3 or 4 weeks. So hopefully the baby comes between now and then. We already have one Halloween baby in the family. We might get a second one. And if anything else, I will try to make sure that interview happens next week with Eric Metaxas, who I'm really excited to chat with. So thanks for joining me. Let me check and see if there's any comments before we go, just in case. It looks like everyone's already in bed, so that's the way it goes. Oohaleyeah here. Thanks for joining, and make sure to subscribe, follow on social media, even though I don't use it, whatever, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care.